Thank you for bringing me in today. It's delightful to be here, and I want to start with the really good news. So the secret to better team meetings is not better people. Isn't that helpful?
There's hope.
It's also not using an agenda. It's not about keeping your meetings shorter. The secret does not involve sending all of your people off for people skills training. Right? So all good news right there. I used to personally believe that that actually was the key. As he mentioned, I started my real job career in an internet software startup. And even though we knew we were desperately cool and important and that the work we were doing was going to change the face of business forever, we had terrible meetings. I began working for the professional services group for a wonderful, soft-spoken manager. One of the types who doesn't really look girls in the eye. Yeah. And our meetings rambled, and they drifted, and I fell asleep a lot, and I decided that he was probably incompetent. So I was really glad when I got shifted to the product team, where I worked for an energetic, driven, experienced guy who really knew what he was doing. And imagine my surprise when those meetings were terrible too. They were terrible. We all argued all the time. What tech would we use? How many tabs or spaces should we put in the code? How do you design the database? And we ended up with these engineers who spent a lot more time trying to prove each other right than they did building software. And in that case, I decided that the problem wasn't my manager, because I liked my manager. So it must be these folks with their fragile egos and their poor people skills. And the team meetings were bad, but they weren't anything compared to what happened when we got the cross-functional groups together. Especially if you got sales in the room. Everybody was just at each other's throats. And looking back, I'm actually, quite frankly, surprised nobody got fired after some of those events. So toxic meetings, I learned some really important skills. I wish that I had learned the skills I should have learned. I wish I had learned conflict management. I wish I had learned negotiation. But what I learned instead was how to walk up to a conference room door and stop and breathe and kind of steel myself before I walked in, so that while in that room I could keep my mouth shut and play it safe and figure out who I needed to talk to afterwards to get the real work done in a side channel. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people who doesn't leave a problem alone very well. And I kind of believe in my heart that if you're not trying to solve a problem, then you really have no business complaining about it. And these are meetings I was complaining about, but I couldn't figure it out. I didn't know how to fix this. And I asked the CEO, and I said, should we get training? And he's like, no, we don't need to be spending any more time on meetings. They're a waste of time. And yet we were meeting more and more and more all the time, and it wasn't getting any better, and it didn't make any sense to me. Looking back, I realized that I was trying to solve a problem when I had no idea what success looked like, right? I had no vision of what it meant to work in a company with successful meetings. So, there is one. But what I did know, and I think what we all know, is how to spot a lousy meeting. And when we are in a lousy meeting, you can look around the room and you can see that it's full of people acting badly, which makes us believe that lousy meetings are a people problem. But then I had two experiences that changed my perspective. First, I got involved in international standards work. The software that we built was for international standards teams like IEEE, ANSI, USB, all of those folks. And when you do standards work, you are by definition bringing together people who work for competitors, for the government, for consumers. These are folks who have radically different values coming into the same room, way bigger problems than we had in my internal teams at the companies, and yet they got work done. Now, with standards, you don't get to pick who shows up. You don't get to sit on your committee and say, okay, great, I'm gonna run a committee only with folks who have excellent people skills. Right? You have to work with what you've got. And the way they did that, Standards Work has a series of well-defined meetings that drive how that work gets done. Every one of those meetings, you know what to expect. You know how to participate. You know how the decision's gonna get made. You know what you're gonna get at the end. They're boring. These are not fun meetings, but you get the job done. Standards people do not have to like one another to get work done. That was my first revelation. That was huge. The second thing that happened is our product team back at the office, our product team full of angry folks who fought all the time, adopted Agile. Now, in some ways, Agile and Standards Work couldn't be more different, right? One's highly formal, highly structured, the other's very iterative, very learning. And yet, like Standards Work, Agile work relies on a series of well-defined meetings that spell out exactly when the teams will communicate and collaborate and how they'll move that work forward.
What is that?
For those of you who doesn't know what Agile is? Anybody? Okay. So Agile is a way that software teams and other teams learn about what they're going to do in their work. How they describe and define the work that they're going to do in projects, break it down into small chunks, and manage that work using a series of quick meetings to completion. It's all founded around this idea of continuous learning and connection around the work itself. And they have very specific ways that they need to talk about that work, and I'll talk about some of those in a second. And when we adopted Agile, that team became aligned. It got faster, and we actually shipped some software that people bought, which was sweet. Right? It's great. So, starting with those two revelations, I learned that the success in meetings was not about having better people. The success in meetings was about systems. You change the meeting, everything else changes. We founded our company, Lucid Meetings, based on this insight, and since then we have seen these same patterns, these successful systems of meetings used by high-performing teams of all kinds. You'll find it in sports teams. You'll find it in elite surgical teams. The military, the Navy SEALs has a really cool way that they do retrospectives. You'll see this in the heart of world-class teams all over the world. They all have a series of well-defined meetings at their core. And in the past 8 years, we've helped thousands of companies, just like yours, learn how to transform their meetings for the better. So whether you are new to running meetings, or you've been running meetings for years, or even for those of you who are coaches and facilitators, I promise I will teach you something new you can use today. We're going to look at the science, we're going to look at the practice, and we'll do a little bit of experimentation if that's okay with you. Just a little bit. It'll be easy. Because I believe that while it is crazy hard impossible to fix your culture, or to try and fix relationships, or people, you can fix the meetings. And when you fix the meetings, everything else changes. So, shall we take a look at the agenda? All right, so I have this both in slides and I have it up here, but I wanted to show it to you here because this is a simple technique that you can use yourself. This is called the visual agenda. It's got 3 columns: to do, doing, and done. We have been doing the intro, so I'll move that here. Next, we're going to talk about what it means to run a good meeting. So what does success look like in a meeting? Then we'll talk about meetings that work. How do you know your meeting's actually accomplishing something useful for your team and your business? And then finally, we'll talk about a meeting operating system. How do you put them together for continuous success? And we'll wrap with Q&A. All right? So that's it for the intro. I'm going to move that to the done column. Let's get started on a good meeting.
It looks an awful lot like a Kanban chart.
It sure does. intentionally so. I learned that from an Agile facilitator. For those of you who have facilitation practice and experience, and you can see it, this is how you would do it if you did it in slides. This is using, this is helping everybody understand where we're going, and then we'll checkpoint as we go so that we all get a sense of progress being made. Assuming I can figure out how the slide thing works. This I know how to do. All right, so let's start by, I talked about this whole thing is called Meet by Design Using Science. What does it mean to use science? Well, there are two ways that we apply science in our work. One, we read it. we are actually blessed to have an honest to goodness body of work that is meeting science. And this will give us some information that we can use and apply to our meetings. Now, unfortunately, meeting science tends to be very, very generic and very, very high level, which means that we have to use science in a second way, which is by the application of the scientific method. So learning some basic principles, then you will experiment with your team to see what works or what perhaps might not be such a good idea. All right, so success, a good meeting. In a business context, there are really two characteristics of a successful or an effective meeting. And they are high PMQ and NPI. Inspiring? Yeah. So PMQ, this is high perceived meeting quality. And NPI is net positive impact. These are acronyms that come out of the research. Don't worry, you don't have to know this. You do not need to know the letters. You do not need to know exactly what this acronym stands for, but what you do need to understand is the concepts behind each one. And we're going to start with perceived meeting quality.
That doesn't have to be high by that equation. If you look at the equation.
You are getting very, very pedantic with me. This is not the time. So high perceived meeting quality. Yeah, so perceived meeting quality is literally the feeling you have about a meeting, and high perceived meeting quality means that you felt that the meeting was something that you had participated in and that that was a good use of your time. All right? So a couple of really important distinguishments here. You participated. And then it was high quality. What does that mean, high quality? Happily, we have research from 2011 that looked explicitly at this question. They looked at the design characteristics that went into a high quality meeting. And they looked at the things that all of the experts tell you. So if you ask experts, you know, what do you need to have a good meeting? They'll tell you. You need to keep it short. You need to use an agenda. You need to minimize the number of meetings. We don't want to interrupt people. We don't want to have people in all these meetings. We want to have them free to do their own thing. And you need to have fewer people in the room. I can guess that based on how I've set this up, you can see that those might not be quite right. And what they found instead, and what we have also found in our own research, is that short is actually not the key. The key is that you are on time. So if you say it starts at 6:30, you start at 6:30. If you say you're done by 9, you're done at 9. Short or long, both meetings can be great as long as people know what to expect in advance and those expectations are met. The time has to be appropriate to what you're doing. An agenda is a great tool for helping people understand where you are and where you're going, but it's one tool of many that you can use. What actually matters is that you know why you're there and what you're going to get at the end. Clarity of purpose and an understanding that you're actually going to produce something, that there's an outcome at the end. It's not the number of meetings, it's the number of interruptions. Who here has looked at flow state? Yeah. So flow state is this idea, and it's especially important for folks in our engineering communities or anybody who has a creative work output. You need time to get in and do that work, and every interruption eats away at that time. So a successful series of meetings, a successful meeting will not interrupt people right in the middle of their work.
Isn't there also the concept that not all time is equal, that the time to recover from an interruption can be quite long? And so that an hour of uninterrupted time is worth several hours of lots of interruptions?
Exactly. So there's and we won't cover this today, but when we teach folks in terms of scheduling, there are optimal ways to schedule so that you minimize both the meeting time itself, but also the interruption or the task switching hit that you get as a result, for sure. And then finally, fewer people. It's not fewer people. Would this meeting be better if only 3 people showed up?
They might be.
So it's not fewer, it's relevant. The people are there because they want to be there. They have a way to participate. It's meaningful for them. Sometimes that means it's a very small group. Sometimes it means it's a really big group. It's relevance.
So relevance is helped explained by clear purpose and results.
Absolutely. You were my lead in. In general, if we were to sum all of that up into a really simple statement, it's about setting and meeting expectations, right? That's high quality. I understood what I was getting into, and that's actually what happened. I felt like that was a good use of my time. So, like I said, it's not so much about the agenda, it's not about keeping it short, it's about having clarity of purpose, having a structure that serves that purpose, having a way to get basically from there to the results, and using your time as you said you would. Purpose. We talk about that a lot. In the form of a meeting, when you state the purpose of a meeting, it works really quite well if you state it as a verb. The purpose is why we're there. To learn how to run effective meetings and network with our colleagues. To make a decision. To solve this problem in our product roadmap. To interview the new guy and see if he's a fit. Purpose is a verb statement. And as you said, you want to say purpose because purpose is how we know and how everybody who's invited knows that that session is relevant to them. When you're trying to decide who should be there and how to manage that audience, remember that it's about participating in a high quality meeting. And purpose is your bouncer. So that's Priya Parker. She wrote a fabulous book about all kinds of gathering called The Art of the Gathering, and that's her way of helping folks navigate diversity. It's not about any of those other things. It's not irrelevant to the purpose. Purpose is your bouncer.
So that means that if you carefully delineate your purposes, you can figure out how many meetings you actually really need to have.
Oh my goodness, are you leading to like section 2? But before we get there, let's do an experiment. Are you guys ready? Okay, so I am going to ask you first, close your eyes. Okay? With your eyes closed, I want you to think about a really fabulous meeting you once attended. Okay? This is going to be a meeting where you felt like it was a really good use of your time. I want you to visualize how you felt. You know, something where you came out and you were energized, maybe even euphoric. For some of you who are newer in your career, this may have been one of your interviews where you knew, I nailed that. I might get that job. For some of you who have been working in your career longer, maybe that was one of those moments where you thought everything was coming down and you got into that room and you turned it around. You saved the day. Maybe it was just a really good session with this group where you were planning your meetings and you realized that you were with friends. I want you to picture what you were wearing, what that room smelled like. Was there coffee? Who else was there? And how you felt and what you did as you left the room. All right, everybody got one? You can open your eyes.
Yes.
And this next bit you're gonna do in silence. There are a bunch of cards on your table. These are group works cards. Go ahead and turn them over. I want you to each pick one that best reflects your story in whatever way you feel it on. You'll have to share.
You gotta figure out when that's represents your story.
Pick one card that
Nobody objects.
represents your story, that speaks to some aspect of that story.
We're making this shit. No, I've done other ones, but the one that came to mind is.
I heard it was able to. I'm reading it. I just say, well,
And there's no right answer. This is not, you won't be tested.
That's an end.
Once you've got a card, please find a partner.
I got it.
Just one. Just pick one.
Unless you want to.
Go ahead.
I mean, now that you've met again, right?
All right, once you've got a partner, please raise your hand so that I can see that we're all good. Is it okay to have on?
You guys pick one.
Are we on? Why don't you
We're all on.
We're
Okay.
here.
All right. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna tell each other our stories using the cards, and here's what I want you to say. Each one of you is gonna have 1 minute. This is short, it's sweet, it's painless, I promise. So taking turns, I want you to share your name, your card, and how that card relates to your story. While the other person is sharing, your partner just listens. No comments, just listen. At 1 minute, I'll let you all know, and then you trade turns. That's it. That's it. Just tell your story. Your name, why you did that card, your story, and then it's the other person's turn. All right? Go.
Carrying things already picked. I picked the purpose.
So, we were,
A time where distributing experience went too fast.
thousands of pages with very
Experience where they used to all of this work.
I, as a representative of the office,
What to do,
and they were doing this one, it's gonna take 3 meetings.
they were intimately
And they started out by racial questions.
who it would be, why it would be part of it.
And they took most of the hour, 40 minutes.
This representative.
All right.
And I basically said,
15 minutes.
Great.
so I finished an hour and 20 minutes. That's my regular still.
Great. Yep, switch.
Yes, that's also what happened. I can see why you were there. So, just to finish the story, I did not know, but for years afterwards, I was considered to be all chit chat behind my back. Because I got the Sherlock people to do something in one meeting. And they were used to like it, you know, they delayed the schedule 3 months. Right? And we don't know how to deal with these guys. But unfortunately, I was on the spot, right? So I don't know how much people like, they wanted to know how I did it.
That's very good. So the
I don't
other
think
thing
it's
is
really
music. Taking all this information and converting it towards something. Good. Obviously, everybody
Jim Churchill was surprised that I was not going to delay it. It was done with 42, I got my 20, that's enough.
So take your pick.
All right, let's wrap it up.
But I like
If you're
this.
done, you can see me and you can hear me, raise your hand. Wonderful, excellent. Now, I would love it if volunteers, just one at each table, would share with everybody else something that you noticed that was common to both of your stories. Do we have any volunteers? What was something in your stories that they shared? Passion? That's a great adjective. Yeah,
A determination to make it work.
nice. Determination, grit?
So there was a transition. First, as they were describing the situation, it was high stress, but then as it resolved, it was like satisfaction, like happiness.
Nice.
What was common for both of us was in both situations, people saw something newly, saw new possibility and new opportunities for action.
Awesome. New opportunities, insight.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I think in our case, very, very different meetings, but the common thread was learning.
Yeah. Wonderful.
The word he had is appreciation, and the word I had is good faith assumptions. So what we came together on is that we appreciate what each other has contributed, and we believe that each other intends to have to help solve the problem.
Wonderful. There's something about coming together,
Yes. Right.
belonging.
In our case, I think that the common thread is that both of the teams that we worked on, they both wanted to come to a solution. So even though they faced conflicts before, they tried to find a way to.
You got to come together to do something together and solve problems. That's exciting. Isn't that exciting stuff?
Yes.
Passion, insights, solutions. Very cool. Thank you for doing that experiment with me. I know clearly I've been touching my phone as I've been walking around. So, share with you what we've just done there, and then some of the science that goes into why techniques like that might be something you might want to use in your own work. So that technique is called 1-2-all. It starts by asking a question. It's very simple. Does that feel fairly simple? You ask a question, and then you give everyone 1 to 2 minutes of silent individual reflection, so everybody has a chance to form answers or pictures in their own minds. Then they turn to a partner and discuss in pairs. You can also scale this up, so if it's a much bigger group, you can then have those pairs match with other pairs, 1, 2, 4, all. Just do da. And then finally, volunteers offer things to the whole group. So there are a lot of things this is doing for our introverts and for our slower processors to both give their minds an opportunity, give our all minds, we're the kinds of people who don't like to just speak without thinking first. This is an opportunity to do that. It means everybody's voice gets heard. But there are also some fundamental cognitive principles we're dealing with here. The first of which is 1, framing. So the cognitive principle of framing describes how you set up a conversation. The specific language you use, the words you use, determine the results you will get. In this case, I asked you a question about a positive meeting. So we had a positive meeting, discussion, and an experience. The way that you name your meeting And when we see high performance teams, they don't say we're gonna have a weekly team meeting. They have the adrenaline meeting. They have a huddle. They have a crush. Their names have power. Framing has power. Gambling and games. You can approach your game as a huge risk and an opportunity to lose it all. Or you can approach a game as an opportunity to win big. Which way are you approaching your problem-solving meetings with your team? How are those framed? I think framing also gives us one of my favorite meeting jokes of all time, which is this one where if you frame what Darth Vader is doing as having a staff meeting with a colleague, right, the framing is just so wrong, but so awesome. So that's framing. Second, multisensory input. So basically, there are things going on in our brain when we look at pictures. Now, it turns out, while it's great to have slides with pictures on them, you don't have to have slides with pictures on them. You can create pictures in the mind. The visual cortex responds without actual stimuli if you can create that. Auditory, sounds,
Mustache.
yes, thank you. Smell, all of these things. The more parts of the brain, the more senses you can engage, the more likely it is that people will remember what you're talking about. So I could have introduced myself and said, hi, I'm Elise. Or, to see if maybe you'll remember my name better, I can say, hi, I'm Elise, and I like to make food look like animals. This is me. Remember that. So there was a study done by a group out of NASA, actually, where they brought teams together, and they used an exercise very much like the group works cards. And they put up pictures on the wall, and they had everybody go and grab a picture, random pictures, sunsets, traffic, all kinds of things like that, and then introduce themselves and how they were feeling about the project using the picture. These teams are very much like standards teams. They only get together every 3 to 6 months. 6 months later, they got together and they knew everybody's name. Everybody knew everyone else's name. Not a common thing when you only meet people briefly. Amazing, amazing recall. Number 3. This is maybe not a cognitive principle, but we'll get into that for a second. Silence. So we use silence in 3 different ways in that particular technique. First, for the thinking part. There was some time in silence where you had an opportunity to formulate the picture in your mind. Second, if you followed instructions, for the listening part. When your partner was telling the story, the instruction was, don't talk, just listen. We have an incredible challenge often when we're in our meetings where we're so busy trying to figure out what we're going to say that we don't hear what's being said. And the final one is safety. There is something enormously powerful about being heard and about having a moment of silence in which to realize that this group is actually interested in what you have to say. You can formulate your thoughts. It's okay, we're gonna wait. Now the cognitive safety is plays out in meetings. When you talk about culture and where these things come together, it's in meetings where we see that happen.
Question for you. How do you get the type A leader who asks the question and halfway through the answer he interrupts it by giving his own answer?
It's a structural thing. So one of the answers to that is structure, right? That technique that we use, there was no space for that type A leader to have the floor. Until the very end, until the very end. And you can do that. There are all kinds of structures that are helpful that way. The other one is that you can educate your type A leaders about the blind spot. So, and we can get into that towards the end when we talk about questions more.
Prime example, the TV, news, when they have a panel discussion, second and third question, they all answer at once and I can't hear anybody.
Those guys. Those guys. All right, so psychological safety, you've probably encountered this in your work. Amy Edmondson, I know Google's doing a lot of work on it. It actually predates Google by quite a bit. She does beautiful work on this, and as she says, nobody likes to come to work in the morning to look ignorant, incompetent, intrusive, or negative. So, you know, we set up our meetings to help make it so that they don't have to do that. So what's going on there? Why do we have to be so careful about how we frame and how we allow silence for people to get a voice to speak? Well, has anybody seen this? This is Dr. Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. He actually uses this to teach anxious children, and it works great for visualizing with adults. He teaches them to think of the brain as a fist, where here's your brain stem and your limbic system here, and up on top you've got your prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part we use to do logic, to do sort of reasoning and higher level thinking. The brain stem and the limbic system are our flight, fight, freeze, and fornicate sort of instincts in here. And when these things are all lit up, you're reacting on safety cues. You're reacting on safety cues, and this stuff isn't at play. We act from here. So what he teaches people is he says, you know what, take a deep breath, come into the room, and put the lid on. Because when people have flipped their lid, they're not good problem solvers. Something I learned just recently, which I think is quite exciting, is that this system, not only is it keeping us from higher reasoning when we're afraid, this is also the system that lights up when we hear a good story and when we need a friend. So our safety and our belonging cues happen here too. So when you start a meeting, you are always dealing with this. The question is, which way are you going to light it up? Are you going to light it up in fear, where people have to take a deep breath and steel themselves, or do you light it up with belonging cues? Invitations to speak, an opportunity to be heard. The other thing you want to do, and the other reason you need to get people's voices engaged quite early, is that and the other reason that silence is so powerful, is that we're all distracted all the freaking time. Right? So there are actually 6 fields of distraction. There's technology. We're all familiar with that. But you can also have people in your room who are dealing with physical pain, emotional pain. Look how sad we are. Unfinished business, running from meeting to meeting. That can keep you from being present. Multitasking. And then distracting yourself. Right? Each and every one of these is a great way to keep you not being present, not able to contribute to what's going on in the meeting. Silence is incredibly effective for breaking through this because it's novel. If you're in a meeting full of people and they're all talking, right, our brains are wired to detect novelty. Cheetahs running past, everybody went quiet. Either way, we're like, wait, what happened? They all shut up. Something's going on, something changed. So silence is an important cue, you want to use that way. So, we're still on a good meeting. There are 3 parts to every decent meeting that have to do with making all of this work. First, you bring the group in and you focus. This is where you get your icebreakers, your introductions. Well, here's why we're all here today. Welcome, thank you for coming. Then you do the work, and then finally you wrap up. Here's what we did, here are the next steps. You reinforce all of that. That's it. That's the basic structure of every decent meeting. Something you may not know, though, because we've got all this safety stuff going on, is that if you've got a brand new team, you have to put way more time, up to 30% of your meeting time, into this focus. And you've got to put way more time in the end to make sure that they actually have gotten through this work and they retain it and they can put it to work. Once you get an optimized team structure, an established team can bring that down, and then when they're really good, they've been working together, they know how it's going to work, 10%, 80%, 10%. So if you want to get really good and fast at your meetings, finding a great structure, being able to repeat it, and making sure you have some of the safety established to begin with, makes everything else go faster. Finally, the other wonderful way to have a successful meeting and for people to feel like they participated in something that was high quality is for them to be acknowledged and appreciated for having done so. So before we move on, if you want to take a second to say thank you to your partner, Fist bumps all around.
Okay, yes.
All right. So, you have a sense of what it means to have a good meeting. Not necessarily an agenda. Set and meet expectations, you participate, you deal with the fact that it's a room full of people, right? Let's talk about meetings that work. An effective meeting can't just make us feel good. I mean, that's lovely and everything, but it also has to have what we call a net positive impact, and that means it needs to create more value than it took to run the meeting in the first place. Net positive impact actually comes from the environmental movement. You know, you can see IKEA, right? They want to put more good out into the world than they take out in terms of natural resources. We want to do that with our teams too, right? We want to put more energy and insight and learning and good feelings out into their world that we took out to pull them into that room in the first place. And for that, we express that net positive impact in terms of the function or the result that we're going to get back out. A successful meeting, like any other tool, and meetings really are a communication tool, does a job. It does a specific job. So for example, let's take a look at the how we would describe that. We talked about purpose, that's a verb. The desired outcomes, that impact, those are your nouns. Those are the things you get at the end. The learning, the action items, the decision, the answers. So let's look at the Agile rituals. For those of you who aren't familiar with Agile, you'll get a little taste here. The Agile, they call them rituals, they're meetings, right? And they, each one helps them get through a project, and it has a specific function. So the Agile chartering meeting is one where you decide what the project's gonna be, right? You set the charter. The planning meeting, well, the desired outcome of a planning meeting is a plan, right? It's pretty concrete, it's very clear. The daily stand-up, that's about checking where you're at. Where are we, what have we done, any new roadblocks, keeping that team connected. Retrospectives are about learning. Stakeholder demos are proving to the people who are paying you that you are doing the job and building trust, right? Sprint reviews, basically. Launch approval, that's a go, no go decision. They're very, very clear outcomes. We don't do, when we're effective, a planning meeting and a stand-up and a launch approval at the same time. They're all distinct, they're all different tools. And because they're all different, they all have clarity of purpose, outcomes, you can get really good at running one. So this is one of the characteristics of an effective meeting, of a successful meeting, is that it's got the kind of structure, a shape that you can learn. You can become a master at that thing. You know people who give really great demos, right? And you know people who don't give really great demos? That's a thing you can master. That's a skill. And what we have found in our work is that there are actually 16 distinct types of business meetings. So as you were talking about earlier, you said, okay, if you know the purpose, then you can make it, you can know what the kinds of meetings are and you can put them together. There are 16. Across the top we have cadence meetings. These are all about keeping teams running and together on a known work. We have a series of meetings we use to start new things, solve problems, to change what's going on. And there are a series of meetings that people develop extreme mastery in that are about learning and influencing others. So let's look at the Agile rituals with types on them. Each and every system that you will look at, you will be able to see that the meetings within it can fall into those categories. Some of them, like the launch approval, the chartering, the planning, they're about changing things, right? Most of them are about keeping things running. I'm not going to belabor this one yet, much more. This is just a taste, because I want to show you a little bit in a more concrete example about how these things work together. So let's talk about taking the different types of meetings. So you have each of these different types of meetings, you know what kind of work you need to do, and you identify the meetings you use to get it done. Then you put them together in what we call a meeting operating system. And I talked about this in the intro. Successful teams have a way that they run meetings that get work from A to B. A meeting operating system is the system you use to make sure the meetings are effective and aligned to the needs of your business. There are 3 components. And there's performance criteria, so these are basically giant rules of the game, right? In our company, Amazon. Anybody here work for Amazon? Not down here, huh? That's a Northwest thing. So Amazon has a couple of really popular and famous rules for their meetings. One is their no PowerPoint rule. So there's no PowerPoint allowed. Instead, what they do is they write out what they're going to talk about. They spend the first 10 minutes in silence, reading the written statement, and then they go into their discussion. And this is honest to goodness truth. I was at a Metallica concert last night, and I sat next to an engineer from Amazon. He's like, yes, absolutely, that is exactly what we do. So Amazon, they have that, and they have the 2 pizza rule, which is their way of saying that they don't allow meetings to have more than 8 people. Basically, no more people in a room than can be fed with 2 large pizzas. So that's what performance criteria look like. It's a way of establishing the rules of the game as you're going to play that game in your team.
A lot of food.
That assumes 2 slices per people, per person.
You know, the math, all I know is that like pizza must be a young audience.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so it also tells you something about their culture, right? Great performance criteria are framed to help reinforce the culture you want.
So that's way older than Amazon. McNeely used to do that with some too.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, isn't it funny how like the new young companies get to make, like somebody said, oh, Google invented OKRs or KPIs, and it's like, yeah, okay. Right on. All right, operating models. So operating models are these sequences, how you put the meetings together to get the work done. From a sports perspective, that's your playbook. And we'll look at some examples. And then finally, support. An effective meeting operating system has the tools, the technology, the meeting space, the education that you need to be good at what you do. So this is a popular meeting flow model for leadership teams. It starts, and if any of you have worked in leadership, these will look really, really familiar. About once a year they do strategic planning, right? It's a workshop. The outcome is a strategic plan, some high-level goals, that kind of thing. Leadership teams that are effective have a daily huddle. Looks a lot like an agile huddle. But you see this in leadership teams, you see it in hospitals, you see it in all kinds of places. They also have a weekly team meeting, and in this meeting, when they're done well, they are watching the numbers that they set here. They all flow together. They're talking specifically about these numbers, and they're solving problems that are preventing them from hitting their numbers in a real-time way. These teams decide how they're going to make decisions, very much like standards organizations do. They have a way to make decisions. They formally set aside time to do so on a monthly basis. Because you know something's going to come up, right? There's always something that's not on your strategic plan that needs a decision, a big opportunity, a new disaster of the month, and there's a meeting for that. And finally, every 90 days, they do yet another workshop to make sure that this is still relevant to the current reality that's ensued in the meantime.
So they have one big meeting and then they have follow-ups every quarter.
Every 90 days, you pull that strategy out and you say, okay, is that worth doing or not? So in a plan like this leadership team knows when they're going to decide what they're doing as a business, how they're going to make sure that that work is going well, how they're going to solve problems with their plan in the interim, and how they're going to fix that plan as they go through the year. They know how they're going to talk about their work. So to talk about a little bit how this works in practice, I had a call from a director of a non-government organization in New Zealand. And she said, Elise, she says, my team, we do wonderful, important, meaningful work, but we meet for many hours every week, and our conversations go around in circles, and our decisions never stick, and we're starting to lose faith. So we helped them put this model in place. And then she sent me this email. She said, your guidance had an incredible impact. They solved problems in real time. They are connecting with their team. Their strategic meetings are more meaningful because they took and they separated out strategy and operations into separate meetings with clear structures, distinct conversations. Same people, different meetings. And they are achieving their goals. A lot of teams don't have any of that. If you are a team that has clear performance criteria, customer success is a great opportunity for this. If you're doing maintenance work, you know what your goals ought to be. This meeting, getting the team cadence, your weekly team meetings done, will be the most effective way you can change the performance of your team. That meeting is the linchpin meeting. In Agile, it's a little different. In an Agile meeting flow model, we have our workshops at the beginning and the end, our retrospectives. Our cycles are shorter, planning, huddles, retrospective. And what you'll notice in Agile is that this meeting, the icons are the same. It's the same type. Retrospectives show up a lot. What you'll notice when you look at Pixar, Pixar's core meeting is not a weekly team meeting where they're reviewing their progress. Their core meeting is a meeting where they talk about what's going wrong. We made this movie, is it working? So if your mission and your team is charged with innovation, creativity, problem solving, the retrospective, the action review, that's the meeting to get right for you. So that's a taste of what it looks like to have a successful meeting, of what meetings look like that do jobs, and how to put meetings together in flows that help you get work done. And if we have time, it's a lot of ideas, it's a lot of content, it's getting late. We should do one more experiment and then call it an FAQ done. Yeah?
So how do you stick to those minutes, 30 to 60 minutes? If you have 5, 6, 10 people, how do you make sure that you really stay within that time frame?
And the time frames and the specific way that you run each and every meeting should flex for your team, right? So for some teams, it really matters that they stay within those time frames. And like for the daily, they'll do all kinds of tricks. Has anybody been involved in a team that passes a heavy book? Yeah.
I've had teams where you actually have to do a plank.
Oh, yeah,
That's
great.
a tough one.
Yeah. Yeah, I was on a team once where they talked about doing burpees, right? Between, and I think that would not fly with my teams anymore. We've aged out of the burpee stand-up, which is the plank jumping jack kind of thing. So that's one. The other thing that is an incredibly powerful tool is the timer. Timers are amazing. You put a timer on things. Timers are a great way to deal with your A-type driven leader, for example. Everybody gets 2 minutes, you don't start with the leader, and there's a timer. The model is set, and then they can follow the model, so.
How about the successor chairman of a group that wants to undo all the prior stuff?
You have to find out why. We had that happen with a committee. We had a chairman come in, and the committee had established a great structure. They had minutes, they had history, they had clarity of expectation, and the guy came in and he said, we don't need all this formalism. We just don't need all of this heavy formalism. So what's going on there, right? Is he saying that you don't need formalism because he feels it's getting in the way of the conversation. And if that's the case, then you can start looking at how to bring in the conversation. If he's saying, we don't want formalism because he doesn't want to be held accountable, then you got yourself a different problem.
Or is incompetent, doesn't understand it.
And that's the other thing, a lot of people think they understand how meetings work because they're smart people and they've been in a lot of meetings. Right? It's kind of like thinking you understand how, high-end French cooking works because you've eaten a lot of it, or how cars work because you drove one once, right? It doesn't.
Watched a lot of TV.
Right.
Slept at all of
How are we doing? We are okay on time, so I want to teach you one more technique, okay? And then we'll do FAQs on the technique if that's okay. So, who here is familiar with Fist to 5?
Say it again.
Fist to 5. So Fist to 5 is a way to gauge consensus very quickly in a group, and it works like this. On the count of 3, I'm going to ask you to hold up a fist. 1 finger, 2 fingers, 3 fingers, 4 fingers, or 5 fingers. Jazz hands. Angry, fight the power. Jazz hands, that's your scale. Okay? In this case, the question is, how do you feel you and your team are doing with your meeting operating system? Do you have, and I'll count on 3, we'll all do fists at the same time. A 5 says, my team has awesome meetings, we are totally nailing this. 4 says they're fine. We're good, whatever. 3 says, we have minor issues, but those can wait. Show me 2 fingers if you need to make minor improvements, but you really should make them now. 2 or 1 finger if you really know you need to make major changes. And let's see the fists for those of you who have total train wrecks of a meeting system. All right, does that make sense? Everybody clear on that? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Show me your fist of 5.
What's the topic? What's the subject?
Which meeting?
Your meetings, your team meetings. All right, so keep your fists up, and I want you to group yourselves. You guys, thank you so much for having me here.